done a couple videos about Plato in the past already that you could go back to, and I'll probably put the link in for you to see. But there are just some things I want to go back to and highlight. So, for instance, the Philosopher King. I just believe this is a very important part about what he was trying to do. And if it's something that we were able to take away from his teachings, I think it would be very beneficial for the society as a whole, as opposed to a nicotine addiction. The Philosopher King Plato believed that competence should be the qualification for authority. The ruler of the state should be the one who has the peculiar abilities to fulfill that function. Disorder in the state is caused by the same circumstances that produce disorder in the individual, namely the attempt on the part of the lower elements to usurp the role of the higher faculties. In both the individual and the state, the uncontrolled drives of the appetite and spirited action lead to internal anarchy. At both levels, the rational element must be in control. Who should be captain of a ship? Should it be most popular person or the one who knows the art of navigation? Who should rule the state? Should it be someone whose training is in war or in commerce? The ruler, said Plato, should be the one who has been fully educated and has come to understand the difference between the visible world and the intelligible world, between the realm of opinion and the realm of knowledge, between appearance and reality. In short, the Philosopher King is one of whose education has led him step by step through the ascending degrees of knowledge and of the divided line until at last he has a knowledge of the good, that synoptic vision of the interrelation of all truths to each other. To reach this point, the Philosopher King would have progressed through many stages of education. By the time he is 18 years old, he would have training in literature, music, and elementary mathematics. His literature would be censored, for Plato accused certain poets of outright falsehood and of impious accounts of the behavior of the gods. Music would be prescribed so that seductive music would be replaced by a more wholesome variety. For the next few years, there would be extensive physical and military training. And at age 20, a few would be selected to pursue an advanced course in mathematics. At age 30, a 5-year course in dialectic and moral philosophy would begin. The next 15 years would be spent gathering practical experience through public service. Finally, at age 50, the ablest person would reach the highest level of knowledge, the vision of the good, and would then be ready for the task of governing the state. I just feel like that's such an important way to develop a human being if they are to be of any sort of authoritative role in society or like a decision maker of sorts. You know, so yeah, I wanted to just harp on the Philosopher King. I'm going to go into the decline of the ideal state in a little bit. I know I've gone through that before, but I want to go through it again. I just feel the Philosopher King, if people were to lead a life where the steps of development were aligned with that, I could, you can't even really imagine what a world like that would be shaped like or look like. It just sounds competent, you know? To me, it sounds just obviously, yes, it's a good idea to probably have a structured system of development for the people who are going to take state positions or positions in the state, especially through different fields and like extensive training, like at the age of 50, the ableist, not even just being at the age of 50 and having the qualifications, is the ableist, who's most capable. All right. The decline of the ideal state. Plato argued that if the state were a giant person, then it would reflect the kind of people a community has become. What he had in mind was that although human nature is fixed and that all What he had in mind was that although human nature is fixed in that all people possess a tripartite soul, the kind of people they become will depend on the degree of internal harmony they achieve. The state will therefore reflect these variations in human character. For this reason, Plato argued that constitutions cannot come out of sticks and stones. They must result from the preponderance of certain characters which draw the rest of the community in their wake. So if there are five forms of government, there must be five kinds of mental constitution among individuals, and these five forms of governments are aristocracy, timocracy, plutocracy, democracy, and despotism. Plato considered the transition from aristocracy to despotism as a step-by-step decline in the quality of the state corresponding to a gradual deterioration of the moral character of rulers and citizens. And you can have your own opinions about that, but I find it hard to see the rulers of today at the same caliber of some from the past, but maybe that is an illusion of living in the present. His ideal state was an aristocracy, in which the rational element embodied in the philosopher king was supreme, and in which people's reason controlled their appetites. That's the hugest thing I think that we got out of whack with. It's like appetites completely overruled decision making or necessity. All I see are people, engorging themselves. I guess gluttony, if you want to put a term on it like that. But Plato emphasized that although this was only an ideal, it was nevertheless a very significant target to aim at. He was deeply disenchanted with politics, particularly because of the way Athens had executed Socrates and had failed to produce consistently. My bad. He was deeply disenchanted with politics, particularly because of the way Athens had executed Socrates and had failed to produce consistently good leaders. As I gazed upon the whirlpool of public life, he writes, 1. He saw clearly in regard to all states now existing that without exemption their system of government is bad. Still, the norm for a state is aristocracy, since in that form we find the proper subordination of all classes. Even if this ideal were achieved, however, there would be a possibility for change, since nothing is permanent, and aristocracy would decline first of all into a timocracy. This represents a degeneration, for timocracy represents the love of honor, and insofar as ambitious members of the ruling class love their own honor more than the common good, the spirited part of the soul has usurped the role of reason. Although this is only a small break in the structure of the soul, it does begin a process whereby the irrational part assumes a progressively larger role. And that's something that I think we have a tough time understanding, is that we don't have, I don't believe, these thousands or, just the variety of issues that we have, I believe, come from a root somewhere. Maybe that's a grandiose thought to have, but I just feel that we're just seeing the offshoots of just one root problem that is at the core of things. And if this, Alright. So, although this is only a small break in the structure of the soul, it does begin a process whereby the irrational part assumes a progressively larger role. It is a short step from love of honor to the desire of wealth, for which means allowing the appetites to rule. And it's like, just tell me that's not where we're at right fucking now. Even under a timocracy, there would be the beginning of a system of private property. And this is where I just feel like things always start to just take a turn. And I'm not literate enough on the subject to know exactly what causes it, or if it's true or not, but it just seems like when private property gets involved, shit goes south. And this desire for riches paves the way for a system of government called plutocracy, in which power resides in the hands of people whose main concern is wealth. And Plato says, as the rich rise in social esteem, the virtuous sink. What is problematic about plutocracy, according to Plato, is that it breaks the unity of the state into two contending classes, the rich and the poor. Moreover, plutocrats are consumers of goods, and when they have used up their money, they become dangerous, and they want more of what they have been accustomed to. The plutocrat is like the person who seeks constant pleasure. Instant gratification could be another word you use there. But the very nature of pleasure is that it is momentary and must therefore be repeated. There can never be a time of perfect satisfaction. The seeker of pleasure can never be satisfied any more than a leaky pail can be filled. Still, the plutocrat knows how to distinguish three sorts of appetites: the necessary, the unnecessary, and the lawless, and so is torn between many desires. His better desires will usually keep the upper hand over the worst, and so the plutocrat, Plato says, presents a more decent appearance than many. Democracy is a further degeneration. Plato said, for its principles of equality and freedom reflect the degenerate human characters whose whole range of appetites are all pursued with equal freedom. To be sure, Plato's concept of democracy and his criticism of it were based on his first-hand experience with the special form that democracy took in the city-state of Athens. Here, democracy was direct in that all citizens had the right to participate in the government. The Athenian assembly consisted, theoretically at least, of all citizens over 18 years of age. Thus, Plato did not have in mind modern, liberal, and representative democracy. What he saw in his day was rather a type of direct popular government that clearly violated his notion that the rulership of a state should be in the hands of those with a special talent and training for it. What produced this spirit of equality was the gradual legitimizing of all the appetites under the plutocracy by the sons of the more restrained father plutocrats, whereby the aim of life has become to be as rich as possible. Said Plato, this insatiable craving would bring about the transition to democracy, for a society cannot hold wealth and honor and at the same time establish self-control in its citizens. Even the dogs in a democracy exhibit equality and independence by refusing to move out of the way in the streets. It is, however, when the rich and poor find themselves in a contest under plutocracy that the turning point is reached. For when the poor win, the result is a democracy. Then liberty and free speech are rife everywhere. Anyone is allowed to do what he likes. Now you are not obliged to be an authority or to submit to authority if you do not like it. All this political equality and freedom stem from a soul whose order has been shattered. It is a soul whose appetites are now all equal and free and act as a mob of passions. The life of liberty and equality declares that one appetite is as good as another and all must have their equal rights. But the continuous indulgence of the appetites leads inevitably to the point at which a single master passion will finally enslave the soul. We cannot yield to every craving without finally having to yield to the strongest and most persistent passion. At this point, we say that we are under the tyranny of our master passion. Likewise, in the state, the passion for money and pleasures leads the masses to plunder the rich. As the rich resist, the masses seek out a strong person who will be their champion. But this person demands and acquires absolute power and makes slaves of the people. And only later do the people realize to what depths of subjugation they have fallen. This is the unjust society, the enlargement of the unjust soul. The natural end of democracy is despotism, which is basically just another term for tyranny. It just seems to me, if you read the things from the past, it's so clear there are representations of the problems they've had currently. Just nuts. Knocking butts. So, and I'm going to go into the view of the cosmos now. I don't believe I did that one justice when I did it. And then we'll be on to Aristotle. But his view of the cosmos, although Plato's most consistent and sustained thought centered around moral and political philosophy, he also turned his attention to science. His theory of nature or physics is found chiefly in the Timaeus, a dialogue that, according to some scholars, Plato wrote when he was about 70 years old. Plato had not deliberately postponed this subject, nor had he chosen to deal with moral matters instead of promoting the advancement of science. On the contrary, the science of his day had reached a blind alley, and there seemed to be no fruitful direction to take in this field. Earlier, according to Plato, Socrates had had a prodigious desire to know that department of philosophy which is called the investigation of nature, to know the cause of things. However, Socrates was disillusioned by the conflicting answers and theories put forward by Anaximander, Anaximenes, Leucippus, and Democritus, and others. Plato shared this disappointment. Moreover, as his own philosophy took shape, some of his theories about reality cast doubt on the possibility of a strictly accurate scientific knowledge. Physics, he thought, could never be more than a likely story. It was particularly his theory of the forms that rendered a science as an exact type of knowledge impossible. The real world, he said, is the world of forms, whereas the visible world is full of change and imperfection, yet it is about the visible world of things that science seeks to build its theories. How can we formulate accurate, reliable, and permanent knowledge about a subject matter that it itself is imperfect and full of change? At the same time, though, Plato clearly felt that his theory of the forms, as well as his notions of morality, evil, and truth, required a view of the cosmos in which all these elements of his thought could be brought together in a coherent way. Recognizing then that his account of the material world was only a likely story or at best probable knowledge, he nevertheless was convinced that what he had to say about the world was as accurate as the subject matter would allow. Plato's first thought about the world was that though it is full of change and imperfection, it nevertheless exhibits order and purpose. He rejected the explanation given by Democritus, who had argued that all things came into being through the accidental collision of atoms. When Plato considered, for example, the orbit of the planets, he observed they were arranged according to a precise series of geometric intervals, which, when appropriately calculated, produced the basis for the harmonic scale. Plato made much of Pythagorean mathematics in describing the world. However, instead of saying as the Pythagoreans did, that things are numbers, he said that things participate in numbers and they are capable of a mathematical explanation. This mathematical characteristic of things suggested to Plato that behind things there must be thought and purpose, and not merely chance and subsequent mechanism. The cosmos must therefore be the work of intelligence, since it is the mind that orders all things. Humanity and the world bear a likeness to each other, for both contain, first, an intelligible and eternal element, and second, a sensible and perishable element. This dualism is expressed in people by the union of soul and body. Similarly, the world is a soul in which things as we know them are arranged. Although Plato said that mind orders everything, he did not develop a theory of creation. Theories of creation typically hold that things are created out of nothing, but Plato's explanation of the origin of the visible world bypasses this notion of creation. Granted, Plato does say that that which becomes must necessarily become through the agency of some cause. That which becomes must necessarily become through the agency of some cause. However, this agent, which he calls the divine craftsman or demiurge, does not bring new things into being, but rather confronts and orders what already exists in chaotic form. We have, then, a picture of the craftsman with the material on which he will work, thus in explaining the generation of things as we know them in the visible world. Plato assumes the existence of all the ingredients of things, namely that of which things are made, the demiurge who is the craftsman, and the forms or patterns after which things are made. Plato departed from the materialists who thought that all things came from some original kind of matter. Whether in the form of earth, air, fire, or water, Plato did not accept the notion that matter was the basic reality. Matter itself, Plato said, must be explained in more refined terms as the composition not of some finer forms of matter, but of something other than matter. What we call matter, whether in the form of earth or water, is a reflection of a form, and these forms are expressed through a medium. Things are generated out of what Plato calls the receptacle, which he considered the nurse of all becoming. The receptacle is a matrix or a medium that has no structure, but that is capable of receiving the imposition of structure by the demiurge. Another word Plato uses for the receptacle is space, which he says is everlasting, not admitting destruction, providing a situation for all things that come into being, but itself grasped without the senses by a sort of illegitimate reasoning and hardly an object of belief. There is no explanation of the origin of the receptacle, for in Plato's thought he is underived, as are the forms and the demiurge. The receptacle is where things appear and perish. To an unreflective person, earth and water may appear to be solid and permanent kinds of matter, but Plato said that they are constantly changing and therefore do not hold still long enough to be described as this or that, or by any phrase that exhibits them as having permanent being. What the senses consider matter or substance when they apprehend the elements of earth and water are only qualities. These qualities then appear through the medium of the receptacle in which all of them are always coming to be, making their appearance and vanishing out of it. Material objects are composed of non-material compounds. Here Plato is again influenced by the Pythagorean perspective when he argues that the solid objects of matter are described and defined in geometric terms according to their surfaces. Any surface, he said, can be resolved by triangles, and any triangle in turn can be divided into right triangles. These shapes, these triangular surfaces, are irreducible and must therefore be the ingredients of the compound known as matter. The simplest solid, for example, would be a pyramid that consists of 4 triangular surfaces. Similarly, a cube, 2 half squares, that is 2 triangles, what we normally call solid, similarly, a cube could be made of 6 square surfaces, with each square surface is composed of 2 half squares, that is 2 triangles. What we normally call solid never contains anything more than surfaces, so that we can say that body or molecules are geometric figures. Indeed, the whole universe can be thought of in terms of its geometrical diagram, and can be defined simply as what is happening in space, or as space reflecting various forms. What Plato wanted particularly to establish was the notion that matter is only the appearance of something more basic. If various kinds of triangles represent the basic constituents of all things, how can we account for the variations in things as well as their stability? What, in short, makes it possible to have the kind of world and universe that we know? Here again, Plato was forced to assume that all things must be ordered by mind, that the cosmos is the activity of the world soul, namely the soul of the living cosmos. The world of things is the world of phenomena, which is the Greek word for appearances. What is presented to our perception is the multitude of appearances which, when analyzed, are found to consist of geometric surfaces. These surfaces, again, are primary and irreducible and are found as raw material in the receptacle and require some organizing agency to arrange them first into triangles and then into phenomena. All this activity is achieved by the world soul. The world soul is eternal, though at times Plato appears to say that this is the creation of the demiurge. Although the world soul is eternal, the world of appearance is full of change. Just as in humans, the soul represents the eternal element, whereas the body contains the principle of change. The world of matter and body changes because it is composite and always tends to return to its basic constituents, going into and going out of space. But insofar as the world soul is eternal, there is, in spite of all the change in the world of our experience, an element of stability and permanence, a structure, a discernible universe. There is evil in the world, Plato says, because there are obstacles in the way of the demiurge. The world is not perfectly good, even though the demiurge sought to make it as much like its pattern as possible. Although the demiurge represents divine reason and the agency that fashioned the order of the universe, the generation of this cosmos, Plato says, was a mixed result of the combination of necessity and reason. Necessity in this context signifies an unwillingness to change, and when applied to the raw material of the receptacle, it shows a recalcitrance, as though impervious to the ordering of mind. In this sense, necessity is one of the conditions of evil in the world, for evil is the breakdown of purpose, and purpose is characteristic of mind. Whatever then frustrates the working of mind contributes to the absence of order, which is the meaning of evil. This suggests that in human life, too, the circumstance of a recalcitrant body in lower parts of the soul produces evil insofar as mind is not in control. Necessity is expressed in various types, such as inertia and irreversibility, and reason, even God's reason, must cope with these obstacles while trying to order the world according to a definite purpose. Finally, there is the question of time. It is interesting. Like, yeah, every form of every theory of creation starts with like something coming from nothing, or they said at least at that time it did. And it's like, yeah, can anybody really like add like something new to that? Like, somebody figure out. That's why Hawking points I thought were so interesting, because supposedly Peter Penrose, if I'm correct, a physicist was saying that Hawking points could be basically like leftover energy or stars or black holes from a previous galaxy that existed. So I just think that's super interesting. You know, so maybe like, yeah, it didn't come from nothing. Like, we came from something. Like, it's such a, what was it called when they like came over here? Manifest destiny. It's like we have such like an ego about like this being the only way things have ever been, and I think that we are so disillusioned by that thought. But let's talk about time. Finally, there's the question of time. According to Plato, time comes to be only after phenomena are produced, not until there are things as we know them, as imperfect and changing, can there be time. Until then, by definition, whatever is eternal. The very meaning of time is change, and therefore, in the absence of change, there would be no time. Whereas the forms are timeless, the various copies of them in the receptacle constantly go in and go out. And this going in and out is the process of change, which is the cause of time. Still, time represents the double presence in the cosmos of time and eternity. Since the cosmos is ordered by mind, it contains the element of eternity. And since the cosmos consists of temporary combinations of surfaces, it contains the element of change and time. It contains the element of change and time. And since change is not capricious, but regular, the very process of change exhibits the presence of eternal mind. This regularity of change is exhibited, for example, by the regular change of, or motion of the stars and planets, makes possible the measurement of change and makes it possible to tell time. Plato's likely story about the cosmos consisted, then, of an account of how the demiurge fashioned things out of the receptacle, using the forms as patterns. The world soul is produced by the demiurge and is energizing activity in the receptacle, producing what to us appears to be substance or solid matter, though in reality is only qualities caused by the arrangement of geometric surfaces. Evil and time are, on this account, the product of imperfection and change. The world as we know it depends on an agency and raw material that are not found in the physical world as we know it. This agency being mind and the raw material being explained chiefly in terms of mathematics. At this point, we would wish to engage in a sustained and critical appraisal of Plato's vast system of philosophy, but in a sense, the history of philosophy represents just such a large-scale dialogue in which thinkers arise to agree and disagree with what he taught. So powerful was the mold into which he cast the enterprise of philosophy that for centuries to come his views dominated the intellectual scene. Indeed, Alfred North Whitehead once remarked that the safest general characterization of the European philosophical tradition is that it consists of a series of footnotes to Plato. Many of these footnotes, it might be added, were written by Plato's prodigious successor, Aristotle, to whom we now turn. Aristotle's gonna be fun. That's gonna be a good one. View of the cosmos, though, is just interesting. I really like thinking about people from the very, start of written reporting, I guess, I don't know, or just the start of reporting, like, just what their thoughts were. Like, what did the brain and consciousness first think of when it saw what it saw? That's why I think some stories are interesting, because it's like, excuse me, it's like, is that was that a 13-foot monster, or was that just a 6-foot guy where everybody else was like 5'2"? It's like, I think some stories can turn into that, but I don't think everything is as radical as that. I believe people were like, yo, this is what's going on, this is what we're thinking, and this is why we're evidently thinking it, like this is being backed by whoever's theory at the time, like somebody's backing it for whatever incentive that might be. Who's to say? But it is interesting, like being a student of Socrates and like watching the court, like, yeah, be at the hand of his death is just, that would make you very much so change your idea of politics and the way that government is being done in that time. And I mean, how would that not be happening right now in other countries, Like, you can't tell me every great thinker is known of and on a scene somewhere. They're in the corners of the world, some of them, and, we'll probably never hear from the greatest one or some of the great ones. And I've always believed, like, the greatest artist or the greatest, poet, the greatest writer, the greatest, whatever you want to say, I'll meet just in happenstance, passing by. And there'll be somebody, just a normal person. I just feel like, for whatever reason, I always feel like it'll be just like a cashier or just somebody, like a waitress or a waiter, no gender specific at all, but it's just like, I'll just pass them and it's like, I'll never know, but I passed them. And it's like, I think that's so fascinating to me. And to have that type of outlook about the people that are around you, it's like, oh, what if they're really like the great one? Like, yeah, I don't know. People have such an intimidational perception, I feel, most of the time about strangers or the people in their environment because of their insecurities. And I think if they were able to discard their insecurities, they would be able to see, like, how cool it would be if everybody was just fucking getting after it, Like, in whatever it was, it would just be like, dope. Cool. And I think about the decline of the ideal state. Ever since I've read that, I understand his form of democracy was not this modern version, but the traits he describes of being a part of each step of degeneration seems to be aligned with where we've gone, you know? So it's like maybe he got the names wrong, or maybe he got the gist of it wrong from what he experienced, but I think what he was understanding from what he was experiencing is accurate. Like, I don't know, Fight Club is not just something. It's not just a movie, neither is The Matrix, you know what I mean? It's just. We live in such a weird construct. And it seems as if it wasn't built for the good of the people in the system, which seems odd. And that might be a pessimistic view, or, my own negative biased one, but it just seems as if we did not make it to be in our favor, which is very odd if we were the ones at the helm of it, making it. You know? And like at the end of the decline of the state, how the people wouldn't even realize to what subjugation they have been subject to before, like, it's happened. And it's like, I've always thought that as well. Like, when people talk about these conspiracy theories, whichever it is, I just always think, like, whatever we're thinking they are doing or about to do or have plans to do, it's like, I feel like, bitch, they did that shit 10 years ago. Like, all the people who did it, gone with whatever the fuck, like, it's just old news. And it's like, it's never going, yeah, I don't know. I just think we're constantly worried about things that have no actual bearing on the present or now, in our personal lives and in, I guess, a geopolitical sense, but that's a big word. All appetites equal. That's why I feel like some of this, like, soft language, like what, damn. Like, yeah, liberties and just equality, like, is equality good? I'm sure there's a degree to where it. I'm sure there is a degree in which it is, but equality, just like, in a roundup, 99% of it hits fucking the water treatment plant and 1% hits a weed. Like, maybe equality isn't what we're looking for. Maybe equality is reached through other means than actual equalness. Like, one side of the scale tips to even out the other. It's not that everything's on one side where everything's equal. It's one's on one side to balance out the other, and I feel like that's what tradition brought on. And then we started to look at tradition as some sort of confinement, which maybe it is, but the confinement is necessary in order for social order to stay in place. And, like, we got this, I feel like we took on this anarchist view, or this anarchist view, where it isn't anarchist at all. It's just, again, liberties all being equal and people pursuing them at their will. Like, that's not anarchy. That's just you being, a slave to temptation. Enjoy it. Like, and we've all been it, probably, I could say. I've been it. Probably still am to some extent, somewhere, somehow. I really do some self-analysis right now, which I'm not trying to do, but, I think there's something that you keep drawing yourself back to. Whether you're a slave to it or not, that's up for discussion. But I think that depends on what kind of hold it has on you. It is interesting. He's just like riddled throughout philosophy and Socrates. You know that he took like most of Socrates' notes, or the notes that he took are most of what we have of what Socrates said. I think him and Xenophon were the only ones that we have that wrote notes lasting from that period. And again, why wouldn't you want to sneak in a little like idea of your own through Socrates? You know, if you knew you had the fucking, you know, as the Delphi Oracle said, like the wisest man of all. If you knew you had him as a pseudonym to write under or something like that, basically at that time, why wouldn't you sneak one in? Get your little taste of it. But that's just human nature. Maybe Plato was immune to that, I guess, temptation of it, but I think with any sort of writings from a historical sense have to be kind of looked at with a little bit of skepticism on accuracy and intention. I don't know why that made me start thinking about this, but the you know, just with maybe it's not that big of a deal, but Nikola Tesla versus Thomas Edison. I just like, I don't know. It seems like it would be such a radically different world and environment we would live in if that was the path we chose to take. But again, we didn't have the principles in place for us to desire that world. We wanted a different one where we transmit information. I'm doing it now, you know. Kind of sucks to me. Like I think about the primal state of living sometimes, and I understand the harshness. I don't understand the harshness of it. I can conceptualize it, but I just feel it would be so much more fulfilling without all this shit. I don't know. Maybe that's just always like. Maybe that's just a disease of the time you live in, where you think it would be better off without the things you have. For some reason, some sort of opposite Stockholm syndrome, where you turn against like the comforts you have. I guess I don't know. That's not the Stockholm syndrome. That's when you like become, you know, like friends with the captives you have, or whatever. But you know what I mean? Thinking about space gets fucked. Like looking up the size of black holes, if you've never done it, you should. It's very interesting to see the scope of things in the galaxy or in the universe, and how many galaxies there are in the universe. It's incomprehensible almost in degree and number. And it's like, could this really be the only fucking spot where we got this shit going on? Where consciousness just sparked? Like, that's kind of, I guess, what reignited my drive to better this place, to say it that way. I just believed that like we were worth supporting and helping. I used to have kind of a nihilistic view about it, which I think comes with age, you know, just rebellion and, just like the certain stages of development that you kind of go into where you just feel like you're creating your own personality. But yeah, like Robert Kropotkin, um, his study on mutual aid really changed my mind on that, and just how, yeah, just it was a very. I haven't looked into why it, like, I guess, died out, or if it hasn't died out, why I haven't heard about it. But um, it was supposed to be like the forefront of biogeology or whatever it's called. He was a biogeologist, I believe, in the 1960s. It might be the 1860s. I'm not really too sure about that. But his name is Robert Kropotkin, and he did a study, and I guess the findings of his study he labeled mutual aid, where he noticed that it wasn't the survival of the strongest species that survived, but it was through the cooperation and teamwork of certain species that allowed them to thrive in a hostile environment, where we chose a self-centered approach in that regard. And maybe that is innate human nature that we just have in our system program, but I find that hard to believe. I believe there's some step we took to breed that nature of us in us. And we just keep going on, and it's cool. But like, at a certain time we had all these people talking about some shit like, hey, like, what's going on? Are they doing this right? Are we thinking about things right? Like, I think we should constantly have those people in the population to be skeptics and on the frontiers of consciousness, reporting back what's there, artists, philosophers, any of the sort, scientists. Art can be done in many fields. Art is many fields. And I feel like we kind of just got to a point where we felt like we knew what was going on. Where certain generations just had this arrogance about, like, we've had it figured out, so let's just start from here and, like, enjoy what we have here and move on. But it's like, there's such a rich history behind us that has so many signs for us to, I think, be aware of. I mean, yeah. It's tough though, because the past is no longer my concern, but history is of importance. you know. I went to the beach today, and I strongly recommend just like submerging underwater and letting waves come over you, like for a sustained period of time, like holding your breath, staying under there, hearing the quietness that occurs down there. I love it. I feel like I'm addicted to it. I'll go there and I'll be like gasping for air just because that's just like not even like I'm like asphyxiating. I'm just like calm, and there's just nothing going on. It's an interesting place to put your brain and mind, I feel, and body as well. Especially if you have any aches or pains or anything like that. Water aerobics. You don't have to be 80 to do those. And yeah, I just feel, and the history of humans, we've kind of always lived at least by water, a source of water. And I feel like being by the coast, I don't know, I feel a strong connection. Yeah. Just makes me smile every time I see it. It's like I'm having a conversation with it, but nothing's being said. It's really nice. I think you can find that in a lot of places of nature, though. You just have to kind of find your own little slice of it. So yeah, this one I just really wanted to go over Plato. Just some of the main points of it that I feel like I might have not addressed thoroughly enough in the past. The next one will be about Aristotle, and that one will be pretty hardy. But I'm excited. Philosophy's fucking cool, isn't it? Thinking's cool, right? Fucking A it is. Like, yeah. Use your noodle, dude.